A wise man once said, "You don't truly understand the value of something until you lose it," and that only in depriving ourselves in the things that we take most for granted do we truly begin to understand their importance. So here in Medieval Dynasty, I decided to undertake one of the most challenging starts possible, starting fresh in the valley, cold, naked, and alone during a long, arduous winter. Our goal here is to keep ourselves warm and alive, build a place to call home, and maybe find a wife and slay a bear along the way. Though I'd need to carefully manage my resources and warmth, lest we risk dying to the harsh cold. And so on day one, we find ourselves in the middle of the forest, in nothing but our shorts. And within seconds of spawning, we are already freezing to death. Without clothing or warmth of some fire, Racimir is sure to freeze. I figured I had about a few hours to spare before I froze to death entirely, so I decided to go in the opposite direction in search of some valuables. In Medieval Dynasty, random points of interest will spawn on the map every season, and some of these points can have tools, weapons, food, but most importantly, clothes and alcohol. Two things that will increase our temperature tolerance and allow us to travel without taking damage. Not too far from spawn, I found a creek and not a whole lot of valuables, but I did find some apples, which do heal ourselves a little, so I ate them and continued down the path. I also found a shovel, which I would likely sell, and continued down the creek until I made it to a waterfall. Below that waterfall was a broken down cart, which ended up giving me our first piece of big clothing, some boots. I mean, it's a start. It also contained an iron knife and a fine bottle of Malvasia, which I might give to somebody in the future. I continued following the creek until I reached the main river on the map. Lots of straw lines this lake here, so I picked up a bunch and made myself a few torches. These torches would keep me from freezing to death here on out, but they do break really fast, so it's not a permanent fix here. I also found a bronze axe, which would make for a good weapon right now. I crossed the nearby bridge and looted a fishing camp filled with fish and fishing spears before heading into our first town, Gustovia. Before we could really do anything, we needed to get permission from the Castellan Unigost. He seemed like a cool and honest dude, and gave me permission to build wherever I wanted to, be it I pay taxes at the end of the season. Oh yeah, and I also met this nice lady in town named Vladislava, and it was love at first sight. That being said, I would need to chat with her more throughout the season if I wanted her to move in with me. I would first, of course, need to sort out my living situation, or rather lack thereof. I wasn't too sure where I wanted to live yet, so after selling some items I found on the road, and buying some extra apples for healing just in case, I journeyed west in search for a land to call home. That was until I was accosted by a couple bandits on the road. I noticed one of them had a crossbow, so I ended up keeping my distance, trying to take each one on separately. The first bandit attempted to retreat, and the second one I ambushed after he lost eyes on me. One little strike could have meant the end of our journey already, but we would survive this day. Unfortunately, they had no clothing, but I did find a wooden crossbow and a pouch that would increase my carry weight, as well as some alcohol, which could give me good buffs on top of some temperature tolerance. I made a small campfire next to the lake and cooked some of the fish I found earlier in the day before getting some rest. And just like that, we survived our first night, albeit cold, and made it to day 2. I picked up more straw and made some more torches because I was breaking torches like crazy, and visited the nearby town of Denitsa. I chatted up with some of the locals, met up with a seamstress whom sold all sorts of clothing. But to make this challenge more fun, I decided I either needed to find my own clothing or make my own. I did sell a bunch of equipment though before leaving the village in search of a nice place to live, as well as some more abandoned locations. And I did find a few. I found more alcohol, I found a copper axe and a knife, as well as some more boots, which weren't as good as the current ones I had, unfortunately. I journeyed deeper into the forest, but ended up getting attacked by a couple wolves. They weren't too hard to defend against, but after noticing the massive Vezants in the area, I cut my losses and went back towards the river I slept next to, since it was a lot safer over there. There was another town to the north called Tutki, along with an uninhabited island, which sounded like a great place to build myself a little hamlet. So I headed north. And thank RNGesus I did, because I did come across an abandoned camp that had an iron axe and a rich hood, which gave a massive buff to my cold resistance. I was still half naked and needed my torch out, but this was a massive find. At this rate, if I found a piece of clothing I could use every day, I should be good by day 6 or 7. Once I finally made it to the island and was certain this is where I wanted to build, I started building my house. Since I was playing mostly with default settings, that included no fast crafting and no fast building. So I spent the rest of the day and evening picking straw, chopping trees, gathering sticks, and building this quaint thatched roof cottage. This house came with a few beds, a chest for storing goods, and a stove for cooking some basic foods. But most importantly, as long as I was inside my house, I could not freeze to death. Compared to the night before, we were now officially a homeowner and living large. So this night, I would be sleeping in my own bed and appreciating the finer things in life. In the morning of day 3, I stowed a bunch of supplies in my chest, stopped by Tutki to schmooze with the locals, before paying the wagoner almost 200 coins to take me to Gustovia. A pretty steep price considering we didn't have much, but I was lazy and I didn't want to walk to go visit my queen Vladislava. All of this chatting with the locals leveled up my diplomacy, so I took the charming trait, increasing how much affection points I'd get when flirting. I also stopped by the tavern to hawk a few more definitely not stolen goods before wagoning back to Tutki to build more on my island. I cooked some lunch and placed a rabbit trap near the house, before placing some roads and building a little well next door. I was surrounded by water, so I didn't really need one, but if I wanted to level up my skills and automate water for my villagers in the future, I might as well build it. The main thing I wanted to unlock was the woodshed, which would allow me to chop wood into planks and firewood, as well as employ villagers there to gather me logs and sticks. I needed a lot more building tech though, which meant I just needed to build more, so on the north side of the island, I started constructing another house. This would end up taking all day, but by the time it was complete, I finally had enough tech to build the woodshed, though I would save it for the next day. I placed a couple roads connecting the buildings together before sleeping to the next day, where I decided it would be time to hire our first villager. My money situation was pretty dreadful, so I ended up walking to Gustovia, which was on the complete opposite side of the map. While there, one of the villagers mentioned they had a hole in their roof and needed some straw, and in return, they gave me a couple apples and an extra wooden hammer, so not bad. But more importantly, I got Dynasty reputation, which allowed me to invite a villager to our island. Since our hamlet now had an open vacancy, I offered Vladislava a place to live, which would also allow me to interact and flirt with her more often, and without having to walk across the entire map. I would also need to make sure her home was stocked with food, water, and firewood, which it was not, so I took the trek back home. Considering new points of interest wouldn't be spawning until winter was over, I decided to take a different route back home and search for more abandoned items. And I did end up finding another copper knife and some hop seedlings. I didn't really need the hop seedlings this early on, but they might look nice in the village. So when I made it back to the island, I stored them for planting later. The woodshed was still nothing but a foundation, so I finished building that, made some firewood, and employed Vladislava there on top of that. I also finished building the workshop since I was in the zone, and made some buckets for water containers. Now day 5 started off great. I met with Vladislava outside, we had a chat, and I gifted her that Malvasia bottle that I found on the first day scavenging. She didn't really care for it, to be honest, which was a little disheartening, but our affection was nearly at 100 already, which is the threshold required to get married in this game. Getting married in Medieval Dynasty is important because the ultimate goal of this game is to have an heir before passing your village down to them, ultimately letting you play as your heir once they turn 18. The bad news was it was day 5 and we still hadn't found any more pieces of clothing. So I thought today would be a good day to go on a loot run, especially running around the outskirts of the map in unknown locations, in hopes of finding some more clothing or high quality tools. The initial search didn't start out great, only finding some iron ore and maybe a stone pick, but I did find some mead. It wasn't clothing, but for +8 temperature tolerance, it would have to do. Stumbling through the forest drunk, I continued the search, and we finally struck gold. We found a light hat. Honestly, it's not that great, because this is more of a summer hat, but it did give us an extra +3 cold protection, which is still better than nothing. Still, I ventured deeper into the forest, where I had to defend myself against a couple wolves. Also, I saw Vezants again, but I was more determined to find the good items, so I gave them plenty of space and avoided their territory. Further down the road, I found another really good point of interest, which ended up having a recurve bow and an iron crossbow, some of the best ranged weapons in the game. Sadly, all my ammo was pretty bad and there wasn't really any there, but this would be useful when we ultimately hunted down our bear in the future. Also, a great reminder if you've made it this far is to pay the king's tax of 1 like or 1 sub. Really helps the channel out and I appreciate the support, y'all. While I was exploring though, my village senses were tingling, and I knew Vladislava was in need of some firewood. That being said, we were too far away to deliver her these goods, so we're just gonna have to speed up this loot run a bit. While this far south on the map, I ventured into a small fishing village known as Yezerica, where I stopped by the tavern and traded more of my looted goods for extra coins. There wasn't much for me to do here sadly, so I continued east to the mountains towards a secluded village called Hornica. I didn't run into any trouble or find much along the way aside from another bow, so I crafted some supplies out of the resources I had, and sold more goods to the village blacksmith. The sun was beginning to set though, so I needed to head home. so we took our last detour north, heading back towards Gestovia. This area proved to be a lot more perilous. Vezants, wolves, and wild boar were everywhere in these parts, and I wouldn't be able to head north without a fight, so I took on a couple boars. On top of that, I ran into some more bandits again, but 3 this time. I attempted to get some shots off them with the crossbow before they made it to melee range, but I noticed only one of them had a weapon while the rest came at me with their fists. So needless to say, I survived yet again. While looting them in their camp, I finally got what I wanted though, winter bracers. I also found a winter collar, which wasn't as good as my hood, and a wooden shield, which might be useful for the future, but I didn't really need it. Minus some pants and a shirt, we were looking sharp. But Vladislava was now hungry on top of being cold, so I rushed back to Gestovia and wagoned to Tutki with the money I made searching the map. Day 6 started with me cooking a third of the meat that I acquired from all the animals hunting the day before. And I also talked to Vladislava, and she was a little unhappy that I left her hanging most of the day before. It was a little bit of a setback in terms of affection, but we were still going strong. Since I had some money, I thought it would be nice to spruce up the hamlet, because I thought it might make Vladislava even happier. So I walked back to Gestovia and bought a bunch of plant seeds. After spending lots of money and unlocking new decorations to place, I was once again broke. It was nice while it lasted. Also, the tavern lady of Gestovia was a little frightened by me when I entered town. I wasn't sure why. No one else seemed to be bothered by the half-naked pantsless man running around the region, but perhaps she was the only one in this region with a bit of self-preservation. Regardless, I walked back home, but took the northern trail where I found another hat and an iron hoe. Once back in the village, I planted a few assortments of shrubs, bushes, and evergreen trees around the houses and workplaces on the island. I also began planning a wicker fence that would enclose most of the hamlet. This did end up costing a lot of sticks though, so by the end of the day, most of the fences were completed, and I also added a couple fancy rocks. Finally, a week had passed, and I thought it would be cool to have a few hangout spots for Vladislava and future villagers to hang out around once we got the hamlet going. So I gathered a bunch of rocks and made a little pond between the houses. I went to have a chat with Vladislava and I finally reached 100 affection, so I popped the question and Racimir and Vladislava were officially married. There was still plenty to do though. She seemed to like the changes in the village, so I continued to add more. In fact, for the next couple days, I spent most of my time just adding decorations. I decorated the woodshed with wood piles and a lumber chopping station. I placed some flower pots, which I need to get some flowers for. I built a handful of barrels around the workshop, well, and the vacant house, before building a sturdier campfire and a couple benches outside my place. I finished the fences and took a trip out of town northeast to the town of Branica to buy some flowers to add to the flower pots that I built. All of these bushes and flowers weren't super vibrant considering it was winter, but once spring hit, I knew it would look a lot more colorful around the island. On the night of the 8th day, I hung out with Vladislava by the campfire, and after a little chat with her, we decided it was a good time to try for an heir. You know, it's kind of crazy when you think about I met this woman 8 days ago, naked, smelly, and homeless, and now 8 days later, we're married and trying for kids. Medieval people be moving fast. In the morning, it was already obvious my wife had a new change of clothes, but thankfully she was still down for chopping wood, at least for now. After another season or two, she would be going on maternity leave, meaning she would not be able to work for the next 2 years, so I would definitely need to get a new villager in town soon. When I tried though, it turned out I didn't have enough reputation to hire a new villager, so I'd have to go help more of the locals before I could hire them. That being said, I did do a bit more decorating around the village. I built a makeshift shed, I placed a privy on the side of her house, and decorated the workshop with leathers and furs before visiting the town of Rolnica to the south. A courier was sent to deliver supplies to Gestovia but never made it, so I was tasked to go find the missing persons. He wasn't too far from the village. I had to defend myself from a few wolves again, but my iron axe did so much damage I could fell them in a few hits. I found the courier near the waterfall to the west, but he was bleeding. I did help patch him up a bit, but he needed a lot more help to get back to the village, so I returned to his boss to send a wagon for him. Finally, it was the last day of winter, and it was time for my final bonus challenge of hunting a bear. But first I swung by Tutki and invited Toleslav to the village. I didn't have much of a job for him to do at this point in time, but I did set him up in the workshop to start crafting ladles. Before setting off to the mountains, I said farewell to my wife. At this point, who knows if I would make it back, but I was determined to fight this bear. The bear took up residence inside one of the main central caves on the map, an area where I could mine copious amounts of copper, tin, and later iron, which I could use to make my own tools. Unfortunately, the bear saw me as I got my first shot off, so I'd have to evade and take shots when I could. I did have a few close calls with the bear, but the poison did a lot of the work. The bears in Medieval Dynasty have a really hard time traversing the rocks and hills, so I used this to my advantage and took my shots after, getting him stuck on the environment. Once his HP was low enough, the bear made a run for it, and before he could die, I dealt the final blow with my axe, garnering me a massive amount of meat and a good amount of fur to boot. A lot of it was weighing me down, so I sold a lot of it in Gustovia before heading home and planting those hop seeds I had saved for a special occasion. Since the season would be ending tonight, that meant any plants planted before the season transition would practically grow overnight. As the night fell, I hung out with my squad outside the house, reveling and telling them the tales of my travels to these lands, starting with nothing, fending off wild boars, wolves, and bandits, building this hamlet from scratch, and slaying the cave bear. It was a long excursion, and I was tired, so it was time to end this season once and for all. When Racimir awoke, everything was green, the frost had finally lifted, and the island looked completely different than it did the night before. The plants were vibrant green, the grass was growing, herbs could be found in the weeds, and the hops made it to their full size. But as it is, all things must come to an end, and for now, we'll leave Racimir to his devices and allow him to focus on taking care of his family, his future heir that is to come, and his little island village, which is sure to become a larger and bustling settlement in due time. I don't make a lot of videos like this often, but if you did enjoy it and would like to see more, don't forget to pay that king's tax of 1 like or 1 sub. And if you'd like to see some more medieval dynasty content, be sure to check out the video on the screen here. But until next time, y'all, thanks for watching, and take care.